Our first speaker this evening is Mr. Brian Meldon, who is a general practice chartered surveyor who specialises in resolving landlord and tenant issues. He mightn't like me saying this, but he's been equally impressive in his voluntary work for the Society of Chartered Surveyors. He sits on our Education Committee, our APC Committee. He's the immediate past chair of our Commercial Agency Committee, and he sits on our Governing Council. Brian also co-authored our Business Leasing Code for landlords and tenants, and he chairs this working group on green leases. So will you please welcome Mr. Brian Meldon.
And thank you all for coming along. And thank you for so many of you coming along, or otherwise we'd be in the basement of Marion Square. I mean the other basement, not this one. So the discussion this evening is on green leases and the relevance to surveyors. As Eamonn pointed out, Eamonn and I actually co-authored the Business Leasing Code for landlord and tenants, and we see this as an extension of that, in the sense that we were on the lookout for ways to update it. And there are a lot of coincidences in this story and this journey, but as you do, I was looking through the list of forthcoming events for the Chartered Surveyors, and I came across a commercial building sector workshop hosted by Google in Silicon Dock in April 2016. Was it April 2016? Seems like it was 15. Anyway, I wasn't so much interested as the commercial sector workshop as I was in seeing the Google offices, which I thought, I'm never going to get this chance again. They don't let anyone in there. So I signed up and I convinced Eamonn. It was a day-long session, so I convinced Eamonn to take the morning because that looked more boring than the afternoon. So I went along in the afternoon. And I sat in on a paper given by Kathy Janda. Now, Kathy is she's a research professor in climate change in Oxford, and a very nice lady, and she gave an interesting paper. Her paper was entitled Green Leases, and I thought, okay, I should know what a green lease is. I'm dealing with, leases day in, day out, and, for my entire career, but I hadn't heard of this. And the paper went into, it was the academic side of they knew a lot about leases, they knew a lot about green clauses, but to me, it hadn't crossed over the divide between the the researchers, the academics and the practitioners, which are ourselves. I hadn't heard of it. And I said, well, do you have a green lease? Have you seen a green lease? And there was, silence on the other side. They knew in theory what it was, but they'd never seen one in practice. So, this is an aside. So in the Google building, this is the kind of thing they do. This is called a conversation. This is harvesting a conversation. So this lady here, down at the bottom, or over on the right there, she listens to what's being said and she draws a picture of it. So she had 5 or 6 slides. I'm in that, actually. I'm the guy there with the light bulb moment. Just there, in the middle towards the end. So, okay, so we decided, well, it's been called then after that the light bulb moment. I decided that we should do something about this. So I kept in touch with Kathy and we exchanged emails, and I got involved in some of our discussion groups, but it was very academic, and they had papers upon papers written about green leases, and I'm thinking, this is a waste of time. If this doesn't reach the high street, there's no point in this, because we're the people who are responsible. The general practice chartered surveyors, the valuers, the building surveyors, the facility managers, and the legal profession are all involved in drawing up leases and in an involvement in leases in some way or other, and they all contribute. So we set up a working group. Eamonn and I set up a working group, and we kept in touch with issues to do with green leasing. Again, you could say it was a coincidence. In one of the exchanges between Kathy Janda and one of our other professor colleagues, they had mentioned the RICS Cobra conference in Toronto. So I Googled it and I thought, this is interesting. So with the support of the society, Eamonn and I signed up and flew over to Toronto. And we sat in on a pretty intensive 3-day, multi-session conference where there were 10 or 12 parallel session papers being given at any one time. But we did notice, Eamonn noticed that on one of the days that there was an Irish girl, Deirdre Ní Lynn, a commercial solicitor from, Reddy, Charlton, formerly from Reddy, Charlton, who is now in Trinity doing her doctorate. She was giving a paper, something to do with construction contracts, which we weren't really interested in, but we went along anyway to support her. And as you do, we went for coffee later and probably to dinner that evening, and we discussed the various aspects of our interests. And she was very interested in the green lease. She says, this is something that's coming. It's the future. I want to have an input in it. Unfortunately, I'm tied up in my studies at the moment, but I'll introduce Roisin Bennett. And here's Roisin now. So Eamonn and I had to go to Toronto to find our third member of the group, who is a solicitor, and a very important one because Roisin drew up possibly one of the first green leases in Ireland. And the fourth member of our group is Marion Jammet from the IGBC, who, if she didn't firstly advertise the event in the Google building, none of us would be here. So why go green? Well, for our health firstly. There is no shortage of research papers on the benefits of a healthy building, clean air, having a view, all that sort of thing. So green buildings are not only good for the planet, they are good for people. We have 4 90% rules here that we picked up as we went along. We spend 90% of our time indoors. 90% of employees say their attitude about work is affected by the quality of their workplace environment. 90% of business leaders now worldwide are changing their approach to workforce rights and well-being in response to changing stakeholder expectations. And here's an interesting one. 90% of operating costs are on staff and salaries and benefits. This is probably in an office context, but it varies. So if you can save 20% of your 90%, that's far better than saving 20% of your 1% energy costs. So, also, there is legislation at the moment which is the European Energy Performance Building Directives requires all new building to be NZEB or near zero energy building by the 31st of December 2020, and all buildings acquired by public bodies by the 31st of December 2018. This leaflet is on your desk there for some of you who are interested in taking it. It's very well worthwhile. So there's also the sustainability and the cost benefits. And there's also the advantages to office workers in terms of lighting. Office workers with windows slept an average of 46 minutes more per night. Indoor air quality and ventilation. Productivity improvements of 8 to 11% are common as a result of better air quality. A better window view increased productivity at a call centre by 7 to 12%. People perform better on administrative tasks with a view of nature versus a view of concrete. So here are the 8 features, or some of the features, 8 of the features that make healthier and greener offices. Indoor air quality, ventilation, thermal comfort, daylighting and lighting, noise and acoustics, interior layout and active design, the view of flowers and views, the look and feel of the place, and location access to amenities such as bicycle racks, showers, etc. So, speaking green, these are terms that you'll need to become familiar with if you're not familiar with them already. So BREEAM is the Building Research Establishment Environmental Assessment Method, which is the UK standard. I think it was the first. So 250,000 buildings have already been registered under BREEAM, and there's 1 million awaiting certification in over 50 countries. So LEED is the American standard, Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. It's more widely used. And we'll get to some examples in a minute, and I've already explained NZEB is nearly zero energy building. And these are terms which are now coming. So, as an example, I'm sure you're all familiar with this building, which now looks amazing. It's the Mycene Plaza building on Bagot Street, which is the former Bank of Ireland HQ. It's a LEED Platinum refurbishment project. Department of Health and Shire are the main tenants. Presumably the Department of Health took this space because they had to be in a building that was LEED, that was LEED certified. This building was bought for 40 million in the recession by Larry Goodman, I believe. Spent about 40 to 100 million on it. There's an expected rent roll. This is all from the newspaper. I don't know whether it's all that accurate or not, but anyway, we'll go with it. The rent roll is expected at 13 million. Now, you valuers in the audience, with a quick thought there, could say that this guy has made a serious profit out of this investment. Now, they added 300 square meters by extending the steel frame. It was easy enough to do once you got the planning. They have a bicycle centre with showers, which that was all new. They have LED lighting, floor to ceiling double glazing windows. They harvest their rainwater. They have a green roof. They have a heat recovery system and large open spaces, and they have top quality tenants, and that's the reason. They had to descend that entire bronze, facade away and have it reglazed. Every single panel was sent away, reglazed and rebronzed. That was an expensive refurbishment job, and they still made a lot of money out of it. Here's Cumberland House, which has achieved another LEED Platinum certification and a B2 BER rate incorporating a range of sustainable principles. If you want a Platinum certification, you need to be reusing and not sending a lot to the landfill. So they reuse an existing building, energy efficient lift system, high performance facade, previously developed site, energy efficient LED external lighting, a green roof, optimized glazing providing natural daylight, energy efficient heat, recovery ventilation system. They have native and adaptive vegetation reducing irrigation requirements, extensive green landscaping and garden spaces, and the proximity to public transport amenities, along with the generous on-site bicycle parking and sharing facilities, further enhances the environmental attractiveness of Cumberland House. That's the exterior. Internally, their range of sustainable principles included, again, energy efficient LED lighting, energy efficient air conditioning, water efficient appliances, entryway mat to reduce dirt and debris. All paints and coatings meet the LEED VOC requirements. VOC is volatile organic compounds. So materials produced on the basis of recycled content. This is some of the core of it again. Regional materials prioritised. All floor finishes selected with low emissions to improve indoor air quality. Internally, efforts were focused on material selection to ensure a healthy indoor environment for occupants. In addition, waste minimisation during construction was key for the project, achieving exemplary performance with greater than 95% of waste diverted from landfill. This is the Mahon shopping centre in Cork. The reason that's there is this is a BREEAM certification. It's a commercial shopping centre. The reason why that's there as well is because that's the first time Roisin came across, in her practice, a green lease. It's owned by a German company. So she was acting for the tenant, they were acting for the landlord. So these are coming. Here we are on the roof of the Oracle building, Block C, East Point. Again, a LEED Platinum refurbishment. That's a green roof. That has roof planting. So, the traditional leases on environmental issues, what were the problems? Well, heretofore, the landlord invested in the plant equipment and building fabric, and the tenant paid the energy costs. So it tended towards not great relationship, and environmental issues were ignored. So in future, leases will be greener. Technically, drafting a lease will provide for the environmental management and performance of a building. In practice, it will be a tool for engagement between owner and occupier for the environmental management and performance of the building to mutual benefit. So, who tends to use green buildings and green leases? Well, in the future, everybody will be involved in some form or other, but up till now, green leases were widely used by large organisations. The same ones are always quoted, like M&S, etc. Generally, in the past, it was led by landlords, their agents and facility managers. Now, of course, the research shows that corporate culture is the primary driver. So you have the likes of, oh, by the way, who's the tenant in Cumberland House? Twitter. So it's the likes of Twitter, Airbnb, Google, Facebook, all those people, all those large companies will be looking for certified buildings. So generally into the future, so European governments will need green leases when taking office space for the local authorities. We've already covered that. Already there is a legal duty in France to attach an environmental appendix to certain leases. This trend will continue and expand. Now, what are the drivers? Well, it all makes sense. I mean, for investors, you've got regulatory compliance, you've got reducing investment risk and future asset protection. For developers, you've got regulatory compliance, increasing occupier demand. You've got retaining asset value and attract good investors. And for occupiers, reducing operational costs, improving staff productivity, procurement and retention. Very big for them. Which meeting SCR, which is Consumer Society Responsibility Objectives, and supporting corporate reporting. So it all makes sense. So to sum up, so the one thing that is clear is that we as a profession need to take the effects of what we call climate change seriously. And that means sustainability in the built environment. And the built environment is our environment, because that's where we operate. The good news is, everyone in this room can play an important part. Thank you.
Our second speaker this evening is Roisin Bennett, who is a partner in the Property and Banking Division in Reddy, Charlton Solicitors. Roisin came to us with an extensive knowledge of international best practice in this area and legislation, and as you've already heard, she has some experience in Ireland in green leasing. We found that Roisin has been an invaluable member of the group. She's articulated in concise but accessible legal language what we wanted to get out there, and she's done that in a very, as I say, very clear and concise way, a feat which is not often attributed to solicitors. So we thank you very much for that. Roisin, I'll give you the floor.
Okay, thanks everyone. Really what I'd like to do is focus on how we can put what Brian has been saying into practice, and I suppose taking things forward in terms of your day-to-day negotiations, how you can bring green issues into your deals that you're doing. And I suppose what I'd like to look at initially is the whole concept of a green lease and where it has worked in other places throughout the world and what we can learn from that. I will then obviously just touch on the legislative background for it and why it is so important in Ireland and why it's something that's coming at us and we have to deal with it. In the meat of the talk, I'll just give you some of the key points in relation to a green lease and the key clauses, and then I think the key takeaway tonight is how you and obviously the likes of myself as key stakeholders in this project, how we can drive it on, because it is something I think that there's great momentum behind it if we actually action what we say we're going to do. So firstly, what is a green lease? A green lease is obviously your standard commercial lease that you all know, your 60 or 70 page document, but you can have either a schedule at the end of it with green clauses, or you can have the green clauses built in, so into your repair clause, your alterations clause and the likes. It's all about sustainability and how the building can be adapted over time to be managed and occupied in a sustainable way. So, looking at how that has been dealt with elsewhere, there are a number of ways in which we can deal with green leasing. So, we've looked at examples in Australia and also in the UK, and there's slightly different approaches. In the UK, they've actually got really good resource called the Better Buildings Partnership, and there's really good information there for yourselves if you do encounter a green lease or you want to read more about it. In the UK, they've sort of taken a twin track approach, so they're operating on the basis of memorandums of understanding, which wouldn't be legally binding, and then also there are proper full-on green leases where the document, the green clauses would be legally binding. I think the Australian example is a really good one for us to look at here in Ireland, because they have taken this full throttle in terms of green leasing, and it's been mandatory in Australia since 2006. So in 11 years, so it's been mandatory in government-owned and occupied buildings, and in 11 years we've seen, just from examples in Australia, this has moved out now into the private sector, and it's really gained a foothold in terms of I suppose, just the culture then in terms of leasing. And obviously investors have seen the win-win for them if they have a sustainable building, and in terms of, you've even seen it there with the Marion, in terms of your yield on your building that you get if you spend money up front on it. So just in terms of the two graphics that I have here, the first one is called the Commonwealth Bank Place in Sydney. That's a new build, and that's the largest commercial office development in Sydney. And it actually houses 6,500 employees in total, the overall campus, and it has a 6-star Green Star rating. So it's the same as your LEED and your BREEAM rating, but it's the top rating that you can get. So that is like kind of the lead example in Australia in terms of sustainability. But also it's important, I think, for us to recognise that it's not just our new buildings, it's not just the Cumberland House or the Museum Plaza. So it's trying to, I suppose, educate our clients out there that there are small things that you can do as well. So again, another example I came across is the Sydney Opera House, and it, obviously we know it, and it's a building that's been around since the 1950s, and they did quite small works in terms of the fabric of the building, but also they looked at the whole sustainability in terms of how the building is cleaned, and that they would use sustainable materials in terms of the services and the cleaning of the building, and that's actually achieved them a 4-star Green Star rating. So, the point being that isn't just these massive refits, in that you can apply it on an incremental basis and it can make a difference. And the bottom graphic is a listed building in Sydney called the Perpetual Building, and that has achieved also a 6-star Green Star rating. So again, it crosses a number of different ranges of buildings, and also it's not strictly limited to office. And I'll touch on that later in terms of my experience with the Mahon Shopping Centre. But the key piece now is that in 11 years, the best performing buildings in Melbourne in Australia are actually using 3 times less energy than the top performing buildings in London. So that's how crucial this is. It actually works. The statistics are there. So it's something, I think, if it's grasped properly, we can see a difference here in Ireland as well. Just touching on the UK, as I say, there is the Better Buildings Partnership, and they have been around since 2009. As I say, they've really good resource there, in loads of information if you want to read up on this further, or if you come across this again. And obviously Marks & Spencer's are the leading retailer in the UK who've actually worked ahead with this, and they're operating green leases in over 80 of their stores. And as part of this collaboration, we've also been involved with the Swedish Energy Agency, and we've been chatting to one of their leading property companies, and they again have grasped this fully, and they only operate now on the basis of green leases. So again, once it gains a foothold and people are educated on the process, it will take off. So just to say, why are green leases important in Ireland? As Brian has touched upon, the 2012 Energy Directive is the key piece for us. There are obviously the immediate requirements in terms of new public buildings by 31 December 2018, that they must be at nearly zero energy rating. So it's really important for you guys, if you're out there negotiating deals on new buildings, just to be aware of that deadline, and again, educating your clients about it. Any other new buildings other than state-occupied buildings is 31 December 2020. And this is a piece also, if you're involved in any construction projects, again, just in terms of not everyone, it's amazing. Like I've clients, semi-state clients, who actually weren't aware of those deadlines at all. And it's only when you talk to them and they're in the middle of construction phase and the likes that this seems to have gone off the radar, just with all the other preoccupations that are going on at the moment. The other piece is that there's a whole review of Part L of the building regulations going on, and the government is looking at that in terms of how we reduce our energy consumption, and there are guidelines in place and targets in place for that. So that's a key piece as well that clients will need to be aware of. So just to talk then about the essential elements of a green lease. When you read up on this, you'll find references to what's called light green clauses and dark green clauses. Light green clauses are clauses which encourage energy efficiency, and I suppose the best example I have of that is the Mahon shopping centre in Cork, where that is very much on a light green basis. The whole principle of a light green lease is very collaborative, that the landlord and the tenant will work together, that you will cooperate with each other, you'll share information, and you will work together with the building in a sustainable way. Dark green clauses then are obviously clauses which are setting actual targets in terms of energy efficiency. And where you're likely to see that is probably, now we haven't obviously been privy to the leases in Mezian Plaza, but probably the likes of your Lead, where a building has a certification that the landlord wants to make sure somebody coming in doesn't diminish that in any way. So as this process kicks off in Ireland, you're going to probably see more of light green rather than dark green. But again, it's all about the corporate culture of the organisations involved. And a lot of times it's tenants actually looking for a dark green clause in terms of the landlord as well. They want to protect the well-being of their staff and in terms of, I suppose, their corporate culture and what they want. I've just set out there the factors which would determine whether you would go dark green or light green. And again, it very much depends on the age and nature of the building. Obviously, the corporate culture piece is crucial, and that's what we've seen elsewhere. And then the use of the building. And as I say, this isn't something immediately you sort of do think of office, but as I say, I've seen it in retail most recently. So it does apply across the sectors. I've just set out here some questions that as agents that you might like to ask your landlord clients. So it's what I'm suggesting at the end of this, that we would update the leasing code and that you would have in your standard HOT a provision in relation to sustainability. So it's something that you actually just ask the client if they're interested in it. And generally you'll find if a client has a green policy, that they'll come to you and say, look, this is something that's important for them. But obviously a landlord who has a certified building, their key thing is obviously the return on their investment. So they will be wanting to know in terms of how do they maximise that rental in terms of the occupancy and the investment in the long term. Just one thing I've pointed out here is obviously there is a difficulty sometimes in trying to, with landlords, if they go too far too soon in terms of dark green clauses. And I saw this in some of the Australian examples where landlords had wanted unduly restrictive covenants in terms of tenants. So, for example, they had things about that you could only use X amount of kilowatts of electricity, that you could only have one staff member per 15 square metres of space, and that you could only operate within certain hours. So again, you can't be, it has to be somewhere, it has to be some middle ground there in terms of what both parties want. And then just some questions for your tenants. So generally you find, and I suppose this has been the experience in Ireland with tenants, it's the tenant who they want a green building. So the likes of Twitter, obviously your Facebook, your big multinationals, they want it. And the reason obviously they want it is they really want it for the health and well-being of their staff primarily, and it's obviously part of their own culture and corporate responsibility. But what we found in terms of the clauses that are of interest, say in the likes of the Mezian building there, it's very much about the amenities available. So it's your bicycle parking, it's your showering facilities, it's, in time it'll be about electric car charging points. So all that kind of stuff. And then tenants will also want to know about the risks. So obviously they'll be asking, what are the risks for me in taking on this green lease? Are there punitive covenants here? Is there a penalty if we don't deliver on them? And also then, are there any behavioural changes required in their organisation? And I had this recently, as I say, in Mahon shopping centre, because my client is the tenant and obviously retailer. And the big piece in Mahon is all about reuse and recycle of waste. So obviously there's an education process there with staff that they need to know, what are the policies around reduction of waste and how do they deal with that. So again, it goes through all levels of the organisation. So the starting point in any green lease is what's called the Building Management Forum. And there's no big magic to that. The Building Management Forum is basically a collaboration between the landlord and the tenant. So it's something as casual as a meeting, possibly every quarter, just to talk about how the energy outputs are going. And I suppose the key piece allied to that is the whole concept of what's called an energy management plan. And that's just basically a document that will set out key targets in terms of the energy consumption of the building and what the landlord and tenant are seeking to achieve. And it could be a document that's updated, say, annually, and as time moves on, it moves on with it. So the whole piece around that generally starts off around sharing of data. So again, we're moving away from the sort of adversarial, no, I've got my stuff over here and you're not seeing it, but you actually share information. The landlord and tenant say, well, look, this is who we're using for our electricity, we've got a really good deal and we've cut down, blah, blah, and how they've saved, where their savings to be made, and they share that information. And actually on Mahon Shopping Centre, they have this exact thing, building management forum, and all the tenants in the shopping centre are part of it. And the plan is then they all collaborate with each other and share that information for their mutual benefit. And this isn't anything, there's no big cost in doing this, because it can even be simple things like timing your aircon, your lighting, your heating, and just trying to reduce your consumption on that. So it's very basic things. Like again in Mahon, it's about how they actually sort their packaging waste. Like it's simple stuff when you actually go to implement it. It's no big cost for anyone as long as it's done properly. I've just set out some sample clauses there that you might see, and actually Mahon had this type of language in it in relation to sustainability. So again, just generally, it's very positive language. It's all about the landlord and tenant working together, about how they're going to reduce emissions, how they're going to reduce waste consumption, recycling, etc. And then a clause around data sharing, about how the landlord and tenant are going to share their data, and then obviously it'll be landlord, tenant and other tenants as well in the centre sharing data. A key piece around green leases is not just about the tenant covenants, it's also about the landlord covenants. And as I said earlier, that can be about, say, the likes of the transport plan, that there's proper provision for that, but also around metering and installing separate and appropriate metering, because how are you going to know what you're saving if you're not actually metered separately? So again, in Australia, this is now actually a legal requirement in the state of Queensland that buildings are actually metered, or separate units within buildings are metered separately. So again, it's very transparent where savings can be made, and it supports this whole concept of monitoring and checking back and verifying how the environmental performance of the building is going. Now, a key battleground, as you all know, is the whole area of repairs and obviously dilapidations at the end of the lease. So I think in terms of a green building, obviously a landlord would want to ensure that no works would be carried out which would adversely affect the building performance. And also in terms of the green ethos, that both the landlord and the tenant would agree to use energy efficient or low emissions products and materials. I've just given a sample clause there in relation to repairs and decorations. So obviously aligned to that is the whole issue of alterations and then obviously yielding up, and a landlord is obviously going to want to ensure that any fit out or other alterations would not have a negative impact on the building performance. And equally a tenant is going to want to know that any plant and machinery that the landlord installs, that would be energy efficient and sustainable. You could actually look to put in what's called a dark green clause with an absolute prohibition on adverse alterations, and probably again the likes of Marion and Cumberland House landlord there wants to protect his return on his investment, so he does not want that LEED platinum rating affected in any way. So naturally, I would imagine they would want something like that. Also, in terms of your yielding up and your dilapidations, a key piece is around the works that have been done during the currency of the lease. So obviously, it can be a major battleground at the end in terms of the dilapidations and work being done. But actually, if you think about it in a green lease situation where a tenant is actually doing works that have improved the building, that a landlord then would not actually, it's a double cost basically to insist on reinstatement in that case. So it's again to look at it case by case, and obviously as time goes on, if you're looking at schedule of dilapidations, to just have thought out that do the works need to be reinstated, or are they actually for the benefit of the building? In a green lease, a landlord will obviously want rights of inspection, and obviously the key piece is around measuring tenants' energy and water use and waste production, so to keep an eye on that. Obviously then, if there's any works that will improve the building efficiency, that they would want to be able to do those. And just something I want to touch on when we look at rent review, how will improvements that a landlord carries out, how would that be dealt with in terms of if that enhances the building performance and that then enhances the overall market value, how would that be dealt with? As I say, disposal of refuse is a big one. So the environmental management plan will have policies around that, and then the tenant would be obliged to comply with that. And again, I just mentioned Mahon, so they have strong initiatives around reducing and recycling and reusing waste, and they have received exceptional scores, 100% scores on their waste reduction, and they've actually won an award, I think, for it's a national award for the best shopping centre at basically reusing and recycling of waste. In terms of assignments then, obviously a landlord will be careful that any assignee or sublessee would comply with the terms of this environmental management plan, and then obviously that aligned to that it would be deemed reasonable for a landlord to withhold consent where a tenant refuses to comply with it. Rent review, obviously a tenant who carries out works that improve the building performance, that tenant obviously will want those disregarded at rent review. But just a controversial piece is around the landlords, any works that the landlord might do to the fabric of the building during the term of the lease, that if they enhance the open market value, then how are they dealt with at rent review? And that's something that I've seen in some of the Australian cases. So it's one I'm putting out there. It's one that will be a controversial one, no doubt, as we see these gaining currency. Building service charge, as we know, that can be a bit of a black hole, and tenants never really feel that they're getting full transparency in what actually service charge is being spent on. So again, there's a real kind of benefit here that if service charge can be, if there's key drivers here in terms of using sustainable and energy efficient plant and machinery, like even simple things like programming the cleaning times to avoid the use of lighting, heating and aircon. And then I've seen it in actually, again, in Mahon, where they have a separate line in the service charge, so you can actually see year on year the savings that they're making. And they actually they have their own, they installed their own well actually for water, and as a result of that, they have reduced the water rates for the shopping centre by 50%. So massive incentive for tenants there, and it's really, really good. Really, like obviously it was capital cost to the landlord, but overall then it's of benefit to everybody. A key thing in commercial, in green leases, is the whole area of disputes. Obviously, as we know at the moment, leases are very much adversarial, and there will either be, you might have an arbitration clause for disputes, or you might have just the usual forfeiture provisions if there's breach of covenant. Key thing around green leases is that as I said, it's very much collaborative. It's very much that you're going to work together. You have this building management forum, and that's where you raise your grievances. So if you have an issue, you talk to each other at that, you try and resolve it at that. If you can't resolve it, you might have then a further period of 15 days or a month to try and resolve it. And then if it can't be resolved after that, then you'd go to expert determination. So again, I've just mentioned the Australian model because they have they have that system, and it seems to be, it's working well, and it's also changing the whole cultural attitude of landlords and tenants, that you are in this together and you're working together for the overall benefit of the building. So in terms of next steps, I know the Society is going to produce an addendum to the leasing code, and I have just suggested that then in terms of your heads of terms that you would have a reference to sustainability in green leases, so at least it's a point that you flag up with the client, and either it comes out or it isn't relevant, or you know, that you actually discuss it. I mean, it's quite clear the evidence elsewhere, like, definitely is that this is win-win for everybody. I mean, apart from the obligations under e-law that we have to do this, it does work, and both for the benefit of landlords and tenants. It keeps, I mean, staff attrition and the likes down. That's proven. It's proven. It enhances productivity and the like. So it's win-win. And from what I can see, it can be applied across a range of buildings, both old, new, as I say, retail, office, whatever. So it's not confined to your Googles and your Facebooks. It does work elsewhere. So it's really a role for us as the key stakeholders in this piece. And I think what we've seen elsewhere, like again, for example, in Australia, okay, the government, it was state-led at the beginning, but then as it gains currency among everybody, if everyone gets comfortable with it, then it gets out there, it gets into the day-to-day practice, and it becomes commonplace.
Okay, I'll ask Marion to join the panel now. Marion, Jammet is our third panellist this evening, and as per Brian's presentation, it was actually at one of Marion's gigs that she was the catalyst for starting us on this journey. Marion has a background in project management, public policy, development and environmental sustainability. Prior to working for the Irish Green Building Council, she worked for the European Parliament, so she's really at the forefront of all of this. Okay, so I'll turn you now over to our panellists. So, any questions?
Just wondering about the enforceability of the EU directive. The deadline was December 2020.
Yes.
Is that being stitched into the planning laws, or?
I'm not sure about the planning laws, but it is a binding directive on Ireland, and the word is that we obviously don't meet it, there's going to be automatic penalties for the state, and those are quite severe. So like, this is coming out. I know it's kind of gone down the kind of level of important things at the moment, but it's there and it is legally binding.
You know, as Brian said, it's staggering. There's no awareness of this at all.
Yeah. This is the road. This is what we're doing this evening. Yeah. There may be actually, I think, with NZEB, there may be an issue with regard to signing off of building regulations if you do not have the NZEB.
Yeah, well, with NZEB on the commercial side, the department is updating part, the Department of Housing is updating part at the moment, so there was a public consultation in April in terms of exactly what NZEB means, and as far as I understand, they are due to release like a description of it in January 2018, so this January. And there is also at the moment, if you go on the, I think it's on SCAI on the UPW website, you also have what they have published as kind of an interim description of what NZEB could look like. So they are still work in progress. I suppose on the residential side, to some extent, easier because we are not so far behind. But yeah, on the commercial side, they are due to update it very shortly.
Thank you.
If I could just make a comment on that, and I'll refer you to, as part of our research, I came across a keynote speech by Marion, who's director of Skanska, which is a huge Swedish building company. And this keynote address was given in 015, and as part of this address, he actually noted that NZEB is almost passé at this stage. They're building buildings now where at the beginning of the year your electricity meter is at zero, and at the end of the year it's at zero, and also for your water meter. So we are far behind and we have to catch up, but it's definitely coming.
I'd add to that video is in fact embedded in the Irish Green Building Council's website, so well worth a look. One other point that he introduced in that talk was he said if you get the design team right from day one, from their experience, that the cost of constructing a green building is about 1 to 1%, 1.5% more expensive than a traditional build, which is impressive. Brian, one thing I noted from your presentation, and the handouts here this evening, you've noted that the emergence of green leases, they're being adopted in the US, in France, Europe, Australia. I know from the UK experience that they've seemed to have gone for a memorandum of understandings, MOUs. Is there any merit in that?
I don't think so. I think in time, I actually think that there is a momentum at the moment, and that an MOU is, as someone pointed out earlier in the presentation, it's not really effective and it's not enforceable. But because the legislation has now caught up with us, an MOU is virtually useless. We might as well go with the full. But of course, it also depends on the strength of the landlord and the tenant in the negotiation process. If you have a lead building, then you have the upper hand. And if you have a tenant with corporate culture that suits you, then there isn't going to be a problem. But it's as you further go down the chain, then it depends on who has the negotiating strengths. But in time, MOUs will be useless.
Yeah. Roisin, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I just really second that. And again, the experience that I've seen elsewhere, often UK operate a lot on the MOU, which are not legally binding. They're not really satisfactory. And certainly from a lawyer's perspective, saying to a client, oh, here's a document, but actually it's not legally binding. That's not really what they want. So I think we're at a point now that we can bypass that and move on to the actual green leases. And because again, it's about educating everybody out there, and that's not something to be afraid of, that we're not being afraid that we're going straight to green leases as opposed to MOUs. I think there's a real opportunity there to grasp the nettle and grow with it,
But I could just add to that.
Sorry,
If I could finish the point, someone mentioned about our discussions with the Swedish Energy Council. In Sweden, they don't have green leases anymore. They just call them leases, but every lease has green clauses.
Yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to pick up on something that was mentioned earlier on about the heads of terms or draft heads of terms, because ultimately, I suppose, a lease is only a function of something which is a transaction. So I think there's a huge onus, and maybe in society as well, like when it comes to doing the deal, it's very important that in the heads of terms that discussion is raised at that time amongst, let's say, the office agent or the industrial agent, whoever that may be. And there probably needs to be a lot of onus in that. By the time it gets to lease, it's maybe a bit too late because the deal has been done. And then just secondly, a question for Roisin, and again, it was touched on earlier, but I was at a launch of a building today, and it's a LEED platinum building, and I guess in a couple of years' time, that's going to be let, and 5 years later there'll be a rent review. And has there been any consideration, or have you seen it elsewhere in other jurisdictions, whereby, let's say, if a building is proved after 5 years not to be operating to LEED platinum standard or not to be meeting its design standards, whereby it could work against the landlord or result in, let's say, negative evidence for rent?
Yeah, like obviously in Ireland now we're obviously in an upwards downwards rent review situation, so obviously it depends on the drafting, if it's open market and the open market has diminished, then obviously it depends on the interpretation of the clause, and obviously that could have a downwards impact. I think the key piece is around if that building certification is defined, they will have hopefully built into the document this energy management plan, that it's a constant monitoring process, and if the landlord has been properly advised that he is being well educated on that, and that's being kept under tight review so that this doesn't happen, because it's obviously his investment, and in terms of the capital cost of getting that LEED platinum, and if say there was an easy, like there's just no way that you would want that to fall below, slip below. But Obviously, yeah, it depends on the drafting, and yeah, but that's the vagaries of the market. If you're out there on upwards and downwards, yeah, it could work that way, you know. Yeah.
Add something quickly. Just as well on that point, I suppose we have lots of, as Rashid mentioned, we have lots of different certification at the moment. But there is something at European level which is called level, with the idea is really to have kind of a framework of indicators for green buildings that are kind of, I suppose, that you can, that the indicators are relatively similar between the different markets. And one of the points that they are really like putting forward in that document is about post-occupancy satisfaction. So I suppose they're really encouraging all the member states to look really at the post-occupancy satisfaction in terms of the legislation or public procurement. So it's something that is coming up definitely in the longer term.
Sorry, just in relation to that, it's, there's a framework called soft land use framework, and that has post-occupancy evaluations. And I recommend that in the case of the Platinum, that there's that's followed, because I think that that's where you can have an issue where you have a building designed to lead, say, Platinum, and then you have the occupants go into it, and effectively they bring in a lot of different dynamics like connected loads that isn't part of the lead evaluation. And so, like Bill Bordas there a number of years ago did a compelling presentation in relation to how lead evaluations were actually blown out of the water once you actually occupy them. And that wouldn't be an issue, you know, necessarily that the occupants would be aware of. So I think it is a combination between the occupants and the landlord in a collaborative environment. That's really what it is, and post-occupancy evaluations.
Yeah, definitely, and that's what I've seen just in terms of examples in Australia. It's very much about that working together, and generally you hope that even say the likes of Museum, like the quality of your tenant, your Department of Health and your Shire, and again about educating the whole way down those organisations in terms of, you know, that even very basic things aren't done that would in any way affect that platinum rating after the event.
Sorry, is there a scaling in the NZEB? Is there a similar scaling to the BREEAM and the LEED in terms of scoring charge, or is it done on the same basis kind of thing? Is it like a gold and silver, bronze? Kind of?
For NZ?
Yeah. No, it's not.
NZ, it's just legally binding, something that has to be said.
One of the earlier questions referenced putting green lease or referencing green lease clauses in the heads of terms. Roisin, please don't take this the wrong way. But as surveyors, if we get that out there and promote it, and one of the things that came out of our discussions with the British Better Building Council in the UK was that where they did go down the green lease route, and they got the heads of terms got over to the lawyers, and the first thing that came out were the green clauses. So, as a solicitor, what would you, how would you respond?
Yeah. Well, I think you're correct, and that's why I'm saying that the heads should obviously have this as an item that's flagged up. Because I know myself, like I get heads in, and either something isn't in the heads that should be, and I'm trying to get it in after the event, and it is very difficult. You know, even though obviously the heads aren't legally binding, but that's the pretext in which the deal has been done. I think, yeah, from the legal profession point of view, we need basically to do what you're doing here tonight. We need to run this and get our profession involved in it. And again, there has been slow enough uptake on it. I suppose just again, just because the focus has been off this stuff on more pressing items. But even speaking to the solicitor that I dealt with on Mahon, and like obviously she has a knowledge of green leasing, but you know, it just isn't on a lot of people's radar. So I think, yeah, again, if we get an education piece out there with all the key stakeholders, be it solicitors, the facilities managers, obviously you guys as surveyors, get everyone involved in it, I think, just based on elsewhere, yeah, if it's something that will take off.
Do you think calling it green lease is part of the problem?
Well, actually, we've had this discussion ourselves, right? And because we had originally called it energy performance leases.
Building performance
leases.
Yeah.
And then it was just, people, I don't know, and then we just thought in terms of green leases, people maybe understand that better, that it's just maybe seemed too technical.
No, that's not true. Marion wore us down.
You were, I can't even remember now, but yeah, no, I agree with you that green, like sometimes green can be just seen as, it doesn't get buy-in maybe on it. But yeah, I mean, what do you think yourself?
Yeah, I think that is a problem, and I think it goes back to what you're saying earlier, Brian, about in Sweden they don't call them green leases, they call them leases, because ultimately if you can build the buildings to those standards now, then that's the way it should be operated, and that's what you
As Roisin said, I mean, we've had this discussion and we did for some time call it building performance leasing, but it's in the vernacular as green leasing. It will change. Probably the reason you're here tonight is because you thought of green lease. Okay, what's that about? I'll go on and find out. But in time it will change, and green. It's that we're at the start of the journey, whereas a lot of countries are way far advanced than us. We're trying to get there.
The added impetus there is the legislation will drive it.
Yeah.
And the legislation will drive it. Yeah. As well as corporate
Yeah.
culture.
Yeah.
Maybe the Brits will be free of EU regulation in years time.
That's the response. That's the response I got. Yeah.
Pulling out those trucks.
Tell them the story.
This has been recorded, Brian. later.
To what extent is this drafting leases trying to second guess prospective legislation? I mean, someone's form of lease for one building could well be different from someone else's form of lease for a different building. The expectations for performance of one party could be different from another. Whereas it's just standardised legislation, the Building Control Act is updated, and there's already obligations to comply with the lease with statutory local authority requirements. I mean, is this a putting the horse before the cart?
No, I don't think so. I think that you obviously you have your usual provisions in leases with compliance with obviously building regulations and the rest. But I think the key piece I see is just the shift in mindset here, and it's actually just this collaborative approach that landlord and tenant work together on this. I think the point is that the green lease, okay, you have clauses in the document, but you have that document, but you also have the energy management plan that sits beside it, and that moves with the lease as the lease progresses. So it's a constant review process, looking at it, updating it, and moving it on. So over the course of your 10-year lease, that energy management plan gets updated as well. And I think we're at a point now that we do need to have this actually spelled into the document as a separate headline item as regards sustainability. And it's not, in my view, it's not sufficient just to have it under the general building control compliance piece. That it is, like, it's such a big issue that's coming at us that we need to actually focus. Because if you have, like, I know when I got for example, that Mahan Shopping Centre release, there was a whole page about sustainability, and I was reading it, and I was very interested in it because of obviously the other work we're doing on it. But then when I had explained it to the client and was telling them all about it, they were like, oh right, I've never heard of that before. And it just gets awareness out there, whereas I think if you just left it under the general guise of statutory compliance, it just maybe doesn't give it that awareness that it needs,
Okay. Marion, would you like to advise maybe on other sources of material on this if people want to explore a bit further?
Specifically on buildings or in general? Green building. I suppose a lot of the data that was presented today, like in terms as well of the link between green building and health and well-being, or data that have been collected with World Health Organization, the World Building Council, and we have far more of that. So if you're interested, we do have lots of specific presentations for facility managers, for agents, really in terms of this link between green building and productivity and health and well-being in building. We do have a lot of data in that field. We are also organizing some tours of some of these buildings at the end of the month on World Green Building Week. So Cumberland has So if you're interested, you can have a look at our website. It's on lgbc.ie. And on NZEB, I agree with you, the awareness is quite low at the moment, but that's something we are really trying. Like the flyer, actually, some of the tables is all about raising awareness for NZ standard, and that's something that is coming up. And yeah.
Okay, any other questions? No? Okay, I think, yeah, sorry, Val, yeah.
I don't think I'm a question, but working on that, see something that may be a conflict with the application, but the landlord has something to do for it.
Very good, Val. Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay, I think we wrap up. Please show your appreciation for our speakers. Our first speaker